Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. Time to look into emotional well-being and relationships. Title of today's vlog, Nobody's Perfect. Now, everybody knows and everybody agrees that nobody's perfect. I hope everyone agrees. So that's obvious. And nobody's right all the time, and nobody's flawless in all that they do. But there are two extreme versions or variations of that theme that result in serious damages to those who manifest such tendencies or beliefs about themselves and towards others. So, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the extreme narcissists of the world and the extreme perfectionists in the world. There are more formal clinical names, slightly more formal, and I'll explain that in a moment. But the main point I want to make today is that we don't fully appreciate or honestly accept the nobody's perfect adage, at least not in all of its manifestations. And we're far more likely than to suffer real harm ourselves and or inflict real harm upon others to the extent that we don't fully and deeply and existentially accept this notion that nobody's perfect. Now, let me start then with perfectionists. So full disclosure, I used to be one myself, but I am no longer a perfectionist. I still have some tendencies in that direction, to be sure, but I used to be forever striving to be perfect and not to make mistakes. So I wanted to get 100% on every exam, and I wanted to win every game and be the best, almost no matter what, at what cost. So, let me be clear. I'm not suggesting there's nothing wrong, with wanting to do a good job or a great job at whatever endeavors we're engaged in, or nothing wrong with wanting to win the game. I mean, that's often the point of the competition in some senses. But that's not what most psychologists mean in talking about perfectionism, okay? What if anything less than perfection isn't good enough? Then that's almost certainly going to be a problem for yourself and typically for others in your immediate sphere as well. Similarly, if someone's criticizing you for being less than perfect, then they're basically setting you up for an impossible standard, and they're setting you up for failure. So again, you're either setting yourself up for failure, or others are setting you up for failure. If you also find then that your self-worth is somehow tied to never making a mistake, again, you're damaging yourself, almost assuredly. Or if you're worried that people will think less of you if you happen to make a mistake, then again, you're at risk for long-term problems. So, whether your perfectionism is self-oriented, I cannot let myself down, or other-oriented, I cannot let others down or they'll think less of me. In either case, these will lead to mental health issues or problems potentially, from social or general anxiety disorders to eating disorders, depression, even suicidal thoughts. So, in the extreme, perfectionists can also suffer from obsessive-compulsive personality disorders and end up being paralyzed by the fear of failure or discouraged from even engaging in many everyday forms of healthy behaviors and tasks and that sort of thing. And then the other-oriented version of perfectionism involves applying these impossibly high standards to those around you, like the parent or the boss who's never satisfied, no matter what you do. This can lead to the other end of the perfectionist spectrum, the narcissistic personality disorders, I'll come back to that one. There's some people who genuinely, though, believe or end up believing that they are perfect, that they cannot accept that they could be wrong about anything, or that they have any flaws, or they can't accept any criticism of any kind, and so on. But as I say, I'll come back to that. But my point is that at either end of this kind of perfectionism continuum, we find serious levels of pathology emerging. So we'll deal with each of these in a bit greater detail here. So if you're a self and or other-oriented perfectionist, then you're at risk for all kinds of anxieties and fears associated with letting yourself or letting others down. This is captured quite nicely, I think, in Sarah McLachlan's song Angel, when she sings that line or that couplet, there's always some reason to feel not good enough. And she goes on, and it's hard at the end of the day. And so that fear of not feeling good enough and the fear of failure both lead to high levels of self-criticism and unnecessary worrying about what others will think of you, and all that stuff that leads to procrastination and related problems. Oftentimes, this comes from negative relationships in schooling environments or childhood traumas of various kinds, especially suffered at the hands of abusive individuals close to you or in your family. And if you have people, when you were growing up, if you had people who routinely criticized you, or called you an idiot, or stupid, or a stupid idiot, or a failure, and so on, well, then that's almost certainly going to have a harsh effect. And it might be a primary source of your own struggle with perfectionism. So those are often many of the voices then that you end up hearing in your head, even as an adult, right? And then sometimes people keep using those same voices and sending those same messages to you, even as an adult, that nothing's changed in that sense. And the toxicity in that sense never leaves either. And then we're likely to convince ourselves that we're just not good enough. So, and then the related issue is the struggles that we encounter in trying to live up to the expectations of others and our fears of disappointing them. It's actually often, again, a byproduct of being, not only abused on the one end, but even being praised too much just for what we actually do or what we're able to accomplish, as opposed to being praised for just who we are or our very being as such. Okay? Again, there's nothing wrong with people praising us, giving us positive feedback, telling us, hey, great job. We all love to hear that. Nothing wrong with that. The issue is, though, are you only being valued then for what you do, as opposed to being valued for who you are? Because if it's mostly just about what you do, then that can lead to this dynamic where people are very transactional with us, or vice versa, and they're only interested in how we can help them or how they can help us, what they're getting out of us, and vice versa. Or conversely, are we somehow hurting them because of what we're doing, right? We haven't lived up to their expectations for sales or, whatever the context. Are we hurting them by showing them how incapable we are of living up to their behavioral expectations, of not doing and performing at the level that they prefer? Now, again, everybody has expectations. Everybody has performance standards and so forth. I'm not denying that, and I'm not rejecting those. I'm merely suggesting that if that's the only mechanism or the metric by which we're being evaluated, well, then that can lead to a really toxic relationship. So I guess it's really striking a balance between what we're doing and are we behaving appropriately, are we meeting expectations, but also the positive reinforcement about who we are and simply our efforts and our being and the gratitude that we feel in just having you on the team or in the family in the first place, regardless of what you're able to do or not do. So it's striking that balance, I guess, in some sense is what I'm suggesting. So, and oftentimes growing up, we end up being punished then for not doing well, right? And this leads to this perpetual drive to be perfect and to avoid any criticisms, even into adulthood. Okay? So interestingly, the research has shown that over the years, over the last several decades, I should say, that the younger generations report even higher levels of perfectionism than the older generations, which suggests that something's happening at a broader level, not just at the individual level, but at the collective level. And so while most people have at least some degree of unresolved trauma in their lives, it seems to me that the question's even bigger. How do the adults and those who are in charge of society visit their unresolved traumas upon their children or the rest of us? And how are they foisting those collective traumas in their histories, their childhoods, whatever that they experienced, and then the systems that they've created and in which they grew up, how are they foisting those upon the rest of us? So it's part of the folly of the human condition that so many people have continued their struggles right into adulthood. And now they're in positions as parents and as teachers, as corporate leaders, as politicians. Okay? And to what extent are they revisiting their own traumas and their own pathologies upon those of us who are in their charge or under their direction or supervision? Okay? Now, let's be real. A great many people cope quite well. They've adjusted quite well. Their levels of unresolved trauma are quite mild. And there are no real pressing issues as such. Many people are still outstanding parents and teachers and business people and so on, even if they have some degree of unresolved trauma. But, and yes, there's a but, what happens in a lot of families and schools and work environments where we find ourselves overly or unnecessarily pressured into fulfilling unrealistic expectations, or where we're pushed in that in the direction of this sort of unrequited perfectionism that's unachievable? What it seems to me what happens is that there end up being a lot of people then who are not happy with themselves, okay? And they're not happy with your performance either. So it kind of works in both ways. And I see that in so many places, including in my own university all the time. So in effect, well, as a result of that, especially at the university level, again, there's so many layers, but I'll just mention one. So one of the things that I've done is I've changed one aspect in particular of my teaching over the years. And that I'm less strict, like with due dates for papers, for example, and even to some extent the quality of the work that's submitted. So in some senses, I am guilty of lowering my expectations. But that's not the intention, or that's not what I see myself doing. The expectations that I learned growing up, getting the perfect marks, always attending class, getting every paper in on time, and so forth. They were just that. They were learned expectations. And there's nothing inherently wrong with them per se. It's just that they're not infallible, absolute standards either. And they're certainly not life and death issues. So in short, I've learned to relax a bit in that regard, at least about the students and how I approach them. And there's still a transaction, obviously. I'm teaching, they are striving to get good marks, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I've very self-consciously tried to do over the years is learn how to value them, that is the students, for who they are. Okay? Value them for their reasons for being there, what they're trying to learn, right? And I try to be more of a mentor to them rather than the proverbial judge, jury, and executioner. So I want them to hear in my voice and in my evaluations that, hey, you're cool. You're smart. I mean, you wouldn't gotten into university if you didn't have a few neurons firing up there in your head, right? You're smart. You're capable. And you're a good person, hopefully, right? And I'm going to trust you to do your best, with whatever skills and under the circumstances that you're dealing with. Okay? Now, do some students take advantage of my kindness and understanding? Of course. But most people, the vast majority, right, they are kind of doing their best and with their resources and with their knowledge base and with their circumstances. And again, I don't know what all the circumstances are. Are they having problems at home? Are they having financial problems? Are they dealing with, relationship issues, etc.? All of which, of course, is going to affect their performance and their capacities to stay focused, to study, etc. Now, again, I'm not here to make excuses. I'm just saying it's a more complex set of issues that students and that all of us have to cope with. And so I guess in my estimation, at least 90% of the students, for example, are certainly trying and they're doing their best under their particular circumstances and in light of their own, again, limitations and struggles. And that's good enough. I mean, at least it's good enough for me. And I try to get them to believe that that's good enough for them. They're going to have good days and bad days. We all do. They're going to have good tests and bad tests, good papers and bad papers. And if they want to keep getting better, then part of it involves learning how to cope more effectively with their challenges, with their struggles. That's one element. So if I can help mentor in that regard, great. I can't spend a lot of time doing that. I'm mainly there to teach, right? But on the side, and sometimes with an anecdote and lecture or whatever, I'm able to give them a little bit more than just the pure knowledge. And sometimes there's some implicit coping mechanisms in the ways in which I teach too. Okay? So that's part of it. But then I'm also going to work with them to identify on the technical side, the knowledge side, the learning side, the computer side, the study side, help develop some of those skills as well. Again, I don't spend a lot of time doing that, but in class and in my teaching, I do often, or I always try to make at least a couple of references to ideas and concepts that have a more practical set of applications in terms of helping them learn, helping them become better writers, etc. I mean, the obvious points are, of course, when you give them feedback on their specific work, on their specific writing, on their papers, or on their tests, that sort of thing. So that's all part and parcel of what we're doing. But again, the broader point is that I want them to feel valued as people, not just because they were able to get a good mark, okay? Or nor do I want to just criticize them a priori for or cast aspersions on their character because they don't get a good mark, right? Now, sometimes it's their fault. Sometimes they didn't try. They didn't care. I get that. But most people do try, and most people do care. And so that's more of what I'm concerned about. And then I also look at it this way. I look at it like as a coach. That is, I'd like every player on my team, when they get out of the floor, the best player, the worst player, however you measure that, I want them to make every shot. I don't care who the shooter is, who the player is, okay? But it's also okay if they miss. That's going to happen. And I'd like my students then, if you extend this analogy, I'd love them to get 100%, right, on their exam or on their papers and so on. I'm a bit selfish in that regard because that makes my job really easy if they're perfect. You know what I mean? If they get 100%, that makes my marking job very quick and efficient. But I'm also a human and I'm empathetic. And so if they do well, I know that they're going to be happy, and in turn, I'm happy for them, right? And conversely, if they don't do well, I'm going to feel bad for them. Now, again, I understand that it may be their own fault, but that's not my point. I get the general point is that, hey, people want to do well, generally speaking, and often they do. Sometimes they don't. And if they don't, well, can we figure out why that happened? Was it a matter of not getting enough sleep? Did you just not try? And why not? What's holding you back? Keeping you from caring about your efforts and your marks and that sort of thing. And then again, there's usually a whole variety of other very practical reasons for why they didn't do as well on this or that assignment or exam. Okay, so this leads me to my final and even broader point. And that is that in terms of this perfectionism and what we see in terms of our expectations of others and others' expectations of us and our own expectations of ourselves, what I see then is that there are a lot of very angry and disappointed, even bitter people in the world, okay? And indeed, that becomes their dominant lens for viewing the world. And I kind of sort of used to be one of them to a certain extent. In fact, I don't have a percentage or an actual number, obviously, that I can put on any of this or reliably use to describe the population as a whole. But I'm going to guess, and again, this is just a guess, that at least half of the maybe as much as half, maybe more of the populations in Canada and the US kind of fall into that category of being angry or disappointed or perpetually aggrieved. And they're unhappy in that sense, in some sense, some deep sense. Again, it's just more my impression, and I could be wrong. I'm not perfect. So, but I think what's happened is that for somebody like myself, I've certainly learned how to accept myself, my limitations, my imperfections more as I've gotten older. And I'm way less of a perfectionist. There's no question about it. That's why you don't see me going back and editing these videos and doing them perfectly or as professionally as they could be done, correcting the errors, eliminating the ums and the ahs and the pauses and the stupid stuff that I say. Of course, if I edited too much of that, never mind. That's a self-deprecating comment, and I don't want to go there. The point is that I just don't have time to live a perfect life, okay? So I find I can get by and get on to more things if I just accept the imperfections, right? The lack of perfection it's quite freeing. Again, it doesn't mean I don't care. It doesn't mean I don't try, but I'm not going to be hung up on every little detail. And so if you go back in these videos, if you look at my vlogs, sometimes I'll misspeak, sometimes I'll quote the wrong statistic, or I'll make, a random error here or there. If it's too egregious, I'll probably go back and edit that, right? But for the most part, again, I'm not dealing with life and death situations, so I'm not going to be too troubled about misspeaking or, screwing up here and there. And that applies to my life in general. I screw up in lecture. And by the way, if I do, I just say, oh, thank you for pointing that out, right? I acknowledge. I am grateful. Oh, I misspoke on something, or I didn't give the right information, or whatever the specific context might be. So, I'm much more accepting of these imperfections. I don't get bothered by them anymore. I don't think I'm somehow worthless or stupid or I can't do my job. I'm going to make mistakes here and there. And if it's a serious one, okay, well, then I want to do a little deeper dive. Well, what happened? What led to this problem? Or why did I get this issue? Or why did I screw up so badly in this particular instance? Hopefully and thankfully that doesn't happen that often, but it's going to happen too, to me, as in you and all of us from time to time. So we got to be open to that. And if we're not, and again, whatever the percentages are then of people, but we're going to definitely find ourselves being more angry and disappointed. And as I say, always feeling, upset about something or about someone or about some general condition. We all have grievances, and I just don't want to live myself. And I would ask you to try to figure out what's going on in your life so that you don't have to live your whole life, again, continually always feeling aggrieved about things, being put out, feeling like, God, why are things so crappy, in this or that context or in my life or at work or people or humanity or whatever, okay? And then my evidence, though, for to suggest that there really are a lot of people who are, susceptible to these negative feelings and these hostile worldviews, and they're angry about something or people's everywhere. The evidence for that, the most powerful evidence, I think, is the fact that there are so many people who are supporting the rise of autocrats and those who we would deem in the psychological literature as malignant narcissists. So, who are the malignant narcissists in the world? Well, the outward signs include those people who always seem to be self-absorbed, arrogant, and boastful, for example. It doesn't take a mental health expert to recognize these as common features of narcissists. Most of us, regardless of our backgrounds or our education or our training or whatever, we can be pretty confident that we can identify somebody who's acting at least like a narcissist. And there are a variety of different behavioral features then that are quite obvious. And if we put these together in a more systematic way, we can understand the kind of clinical nature of malignant narcissism. So if you go more formally into the DSM-5, for example, a malignant narcissist displays several characteristics, including an exaggerated sense of self-importance. That is, they have this inflated sense of their own self-worth, and they often view themselves as being superior to everyone else. They also tend to have a lack of empathy. They struggle to understand or care about the feelings and the needs of others. They're often involved in aggressive acts or manipulation. They are prone to aggression, both verbal and physical. And they're highly manipulative, often using their charm or their deceit to control others. Some, and quite a few end up being sadistic too. That is, they derive pleasure from causing pain and suffering among others. More generally, they'll tend to have antisocial traits. They tend to disregard others, to disregard their rights, to have a disregard even for the rules and laws in general, and generally don't lack, or they have they put it this way, they have a lack of remorse for their bad behavior, for their actions. They can be vindictive. That is, they may have grudges and seek to, exact revenge for any and all perceived slights. They may also be paranoid. That is, suspicious and easily perceive threats, real or imagined. They're also typically masking hidden insecurities, whereby, despite their outward displays of confidence, they often have a quite fragile sense of self and are hypersensitive to criticism. And again, they need constant attention and admiration. They crave the attention, they crave the validation of others. They often seek to be the center of attention, and it's often never enough. Okay? Now, does that sound like anyone in your personal life? Do you know somebody like that? What about amongst key public figures? Can you think of anyone that sort of fits that description? Now, I'm not going to name anyone in particular here, right? I'm not going to name any particular Voldemort, shall we say. But you can probably think of one or two prominent cases. And the evidence is just overwhelming as to who these people are. But that's not my main concern here. My main concern is I'm worried about this huge percentage of the general population who are so damaged that they take comfort in following malignant narcissists or in defending them no matter what. In other words, they're so damaged themselves that they live vicariously almost through the leaders and the malignant narcissist, and they're willing to justify virtually all of their actions as such, no matter how much pain or damage that they might inflict upon others. And so I think there's a series of push and pull factors that lead people in the direction of malignant narcissists. So the push factors that drive you towards them would include, for example, one's own personal unresolved trauma and pain, and then the need to get some relief or satisfaction somewhere from someone. Okay? But push factors can also include related issues, such as one's general insecurities that one has of oneself, one's own sense of having been wronged or mistreated or misunderstood or abused, even into adulthood. And there are many forms of psychological and emotional pain that people have to cope with, and that, in general, push them in the direction of push them in the direction of trying to find almost any solution, right, to alleviate that pain and discomfort and so forth. And then as for the pull factors, many of the malignant narcissists and people with other kind of related disorders are remarkably charismatic, or incredibly charismatic, or they're quite manipulative, and they're very skilled in their ability to manipulate others. And they'll typically offer all kinds of promises to make your world a better place, or to convince you that only they can solve your problems or the world's problems, the Messiah complex. And again, they may be pretty good, and they usually are very good at stoking your fears and your insecurities. And then furthermore, threatening you with what I call the what if scenarios. That is, the horrible things that'll happen if you don't put your trust and faith in the malignant narcissist. And then they're also typically very good at socially isolating their victims at the kind of interpersonal level, the immediacy of your social circle. So they're very good at isolating individuals. And then they're also at the broader collective level very good at dividing populations into us and them, right? And creating that kind and stoking that kind of worldview. And thus you get to be part of the in-group if you buy into their rhetoric and you live through their vision of the world, their utopian vision, whatever that is. And then you get all the benefits then of being part of that in-group. As the old expression goes, membership has its privileges. So, and then again, much more can be said about these issues, but I hope this is a helpful start, and it is just a start. So the broader theme today, if you're still a perfectionist, or if you're still longing somehow for perfection in an imperfect world, remember that there's no Garden of Eden that you can return to. There's no utopia to go back to. And utopia can literally mean no place, right? So there's no ideal place where perfection exists. So for many, then, that's the first challenge. It's letting go of perfectionism. Letting go of perfectionism in yourself, in your expectations of others, and of finding a community or a society or a world that's perfect. That's not the same as saying you shouldn't try, you shouldn't care, you shouldn't work hard to improve yourself, or that you should have no expectations of others. I don't accept that old trope about just don't have any expectations of others and you'll never be disappointed. That's not at all what I'm saying. Instead, our challenge is to temper our expectations with our capacities for empathy and understanding and acceptance as we try to also strive to maintain our balance or find a balance and peace with nature and in our natural environments. So I'm going to build upon these themes in next week's vlogs. I'm thinking about starting organizing my vlogs increasingly in the form of description and explanation, and then possible solutions to the problems that I'm talking about. Okay, so I hit my microphone again. I'm not going to edit that out. But for now, as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts and give hugs in abundance. And if you can't always do that, that's okay too. Nobody's perfect. We'll see you soon.